But we don't know what words to use. We're trapped because language doesn't have the ability to express such a profound thing as da-ta-da. So we say just like that. Maybe we can try the word thus. Thus is neither this nor that. But don't put it between this or that. Put it above, transcending, beyond, above, completely unrelated to and separate from this and that. If you can understand thus in the proper way, maybe we can try this word. But it's still just words. So we're always trapped this way. Da-ta-da is the heart of Buddhism. If we're to understand these feelings, we need to penetrate to the reality of da-ta-da. But this da-ta-da is not this or that. It's not in or out. It's not up or down, above or below. It has nothing to do with any of these dualisms, with any extreme position. As soon as we think it's this or that, we haven't seen da-ta-da. If we think, I do something or someone else does it to me, this is wrong, and this is not realizing da-ta-da. To think that something is good or bad is to overlook da-ta-da. Da-ta-da has nothing to do with this or that, in or out, up or down, good or bad, me or you. Da-ta-da is just thus, the state that is purely thus or such, completely above, beyond all duality. This is the heart of Buddhism, but we're stuck. We don't quite know what words to use. But if we can understand this reality of da-ta-da, of thusness, of suchness, then we can get to the bottom of the feelings. However, there's maybe one word that can help us here. Da-ta-da, what we're talking about, is neither positive or negative. It has nothing to do with all the dualities. We've got one word that can help us to understand what we mean here, and that word is sunyata, sunyata. Sunyata means void, void or voidness. This word can help us to understand, if we can understand what voidness means. Unfortunately now, most people take void to be a negative or pessimistic thing. They get carried away and jump on this word right away and start judging it as pessimistic. But void has nothing to do with optimism or pessimism, good nor bad, negative or positive. It's neither this nor that. It's void, completely void and empty of all these dualities. It has no dimension. Sunyata has no dimension. So it cannot be this or that, in or out, up or down. It's completely dimensionless. It's void. It's void. So this word sunyata, if we try to understand it with an open mind, can help us to understand. If we can keep ourselves directed towards the ultimate goal of human life, then we will realize void or sunyata. But it's very, very difficult to convince people that this is what we need, that this is what we require. It's very, very difficult to get people interested in sunyata, especially children. Children, they're not interested in void. They want things that are happy and nice and fun and all that. Even adults are not very interested in sunyata. All they want are the positive, the good, and all that. But sunyata is what we really need. It's above or beyond all that negative and positive, the good and bad, the up and the down, the wrong and the right, all those dualisms, all those pairs that are keeping us trapped and in suffering. All the feelings, the vedana, are drawing us into these conditions of good and bad, whether it's the happy feelings or the unhappy feelings or those uncertain, unclassifiable feelings. They're always pulling us into duality, getting us confused in, caught up in, and thereby tormented by duality. And so the goal of life is to transcend all that, to be above it, beyond it, free of it, to be void of all that duality. This is sunyata. This is the goal of our lives. If we can realize, if we can understand and realize this goal, then we will be able to completely control all the feelings. When the mind is void of all that, the feelings have no power and influence over that mind. All of you now who are world travelers, students, traveling around the world, what are you looking for? Are you looking for voidness or for utmost positivism? Are you looking for the highest kind of the positive, of the highest good, the supreme good? Or are you looking for voidness? What is it you want? What is the object of all your travels and searches? And can you see the difference between these two things? If what we're after is voidness, then we'll be looking for something that is neither utmost positiveness or negative in any way. Something that is neither right nor wrong, good nor bad, desirable or undesirable. All these likable, unlikable, and all these dualistic things. Voidness is not trapped within any of that. If we use the word tathata, which includes just like that, then we're still limited by this word that, because it's neither that nor this. It's neither this or other. It's not other than that or other than this. It's just, you can't use any of these words. It's very difficult. But if we can realize what we mean by sunyata, voidness, void of all those dualisms, this is the supreme freedom. This is the highest, the most perfect independence, is sunyata. If we can understand and realize, penetrate to this feeling of sunyata, the feeling of sunyata, then all the other kinds of feelings, the positive, negative, and who knows what kind of feelings, will not be a problem anymore. Freedom and independence are within voidness. When we understand this freedom of voidness, then we can understand nibbana, the goal of Buddhist practice. But now we're all stuck. We're all stuck on positivism. So when we hear tathata, we attach to that. Or then when we hear not that, then we attach to other. And we hear not other, and we attach to this. Because we're so stuck in positivism. But if with sunyata is neither this nor that, neither self nor other, up nor down, right or left, good or bad, right or wrong, positive or negative. Sunyata is nothing dualistic. Sunyata is free, it's void, it's independent. This is the highest state that the mind can realize. This sunyata, this freedom, this independence, when it's perfect, when there's no attaching to this or that, positive or negative or any of that, then the mind is void, and then the mind realizes nibbana. Nibbana is the ultimate goal of Dhamma in Buddhism.
Supreme void, utmost void.
The Buddha said that nibbanang paramang sunyang. Nibbana is the supreme void. Nibbana is the utmost voidness. This is the ultimate goal of the study and practice of Dhamma within Buddhism. You need to be very careful that you don't confuse voidness with nihilism. Some people say that this teaching is nihilistic, which is a completely wrong understanding. Voidness has nothing to do with nihilism, but because although things are void, there are still things there. There is still something taking place. It's not nothingness. It's not emptiness, which are some of the wrong interpretations of sunyata. Sunyata is not nihilism. It's not nothingness. It's not saying that there's nothing there, that there's just a vacuum or complete emptiness. Voidness means that there are things. There are things that need to be done. There are relationships. There are interactions, connections. There's all these things, but it's void. It's void of good and bad, right and wrong, up and down, left and right, this and that, in and out. But there are still things there. It has nothing to do with nothingness. It doesn't have anything to do with emptiness. So please don't misunderstand sunyata, as some have done. It has nothing to do with nihilism at all. Now that we understand voidness, sunyata, let's go back and take another look at the feelings. These feelings, when they arise, are void. They're neither I nor mine, self nor soul. They're not atta or auto or atman or spirit or self or any of those things. They're not individual or personal. They're just feelings. They're not I or mine. But excuse us for saying so, but we're all ignorant. We're very foolish, sometimes even stupid, and we don't understand things correctly. So when there is contact, patsa, in the place, in the presence, if there is ignorance at contact, then there will be ignorant feeling. And then we get caught up in the positiveness or negativeness or the uncertain, whether it's positive or negative. And then that quality leads to a desire for more, a desire to get rid of, a desire to know. And that desire leads to attachment. The mind follows through on this tendency of the ignorant feelings, gets caught up in the feelings, becomes trapped with all that. And this leads to attachment. And we take things to be I and mine. We attach to them. We regard them as I and mine. And when this happens, patsa, feelings, and all these desires become heavy burdens. When attachment, when the egoistic attitude towards things arises, all these things become heavy burdens upon the mind. And this weighs down life and makes it heavy. When we realize this, we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to get rid of these burdens? How are we going to drop them? The answer is in not being ignorant about the feelings anymore, to see them as they are, as void, to see the voidness of the feelings instead of clinging to them as I and mine, as positive and negative or unclassifiable, but we still want to try and classify them. If we see the feelings as void, then that ignorance won't take place and life won't become a burden. If we're tired of carrying this heavy weight around with us, this is how to let it go. The difficulty, the problem, the trouble with all this is that at the moment of contact, we're ignorant, and so there is ignorant contact, ignorant feeling, which leads to foolish desires and all the stupidity of that. This happens, the reason this happens is because there is no wisdom. When there's no wisdom at contact, then the feelings are not wise, and the wanting is not wise. And if the wanting isn't wise, it becomes defiled under the influence of positivism and negativism. So what can we do about this? What we have to do is train, develop the correct wisdom to be there at the moment of patsa. And then there will be wise patsa, wise contact, wise feelings, and wise want. The reason we lack the wisdom we need at contact is because we haven't studied this matter. Ignorant means not knowing. We don't understand this because we've never taken the time to study it properly. And so we lack this knowledge and wisdom that we need to manage the situation. And so we have to then turn to studying these things properly. We need what is called meditation, or we prefer mental development. If we develop the mind correctly through using the power of concentration, then it is possible to develop the necessary wisdom that needs to be there at the moment of contact. So through correct Buddhist meditation, there will arise the wisdom that allows us to govern the contact so that only wise feelings and wise want arises. But the reason, another part of the problem is that even if there is some wisdom, often the wisdom isn't there where it's needed. It's not right there at the moment of contact. It's too late. It misses the mark. And this is because sati, mindfulness, is missing. And so this is why we practice mindfulness of breathing. If we practice mindfulness of breathing as the Buddha taught, then sati, mindfulness, will be quick enough, fast enough, agile enough, expert enough to transport wisdom to the contact. So through mental development, we train wisdom and mindfulness. And then there's enough wisdom and mindfulness is quick enough to bring wisdom right there at the moment of contact. And that will prevent, and then there's no ignorance. If there's no wisdom, then there must be ignorance. But if there is enough wisdom on time, then the contact will be wise. And it won't get caught up in positivism, in negativism. It won't become a basis for attachment. So there are at least 4 things then that we need to have. We've already mentioned sati, mindfulness, and wisdom, panya. These are 2, but there are 2 others that make up a set of 4 things that are needed to make sure that patsa never turns into any problems or hassles. So first there must be sati, mindfulness, to transport wisdom to the contact. And then that wisdom becomes attentiveness that oversees, that guards over the situation and doesn't allow anything to go wrong. And then samadhi, the power and energy of a mind that has been collected and focused. These 4 factors, mindfulness, wisdom, attentiveness, and concentration, work together to oversee, to guard over the contact, and then the feelings, and then the wanting that arises from the feelings. And all of these will be correct. And they won't fall under the influence of good and evil or uncertainty of whether it's good or evil. Those problems won't occur. The mind can remain void and free. And so patsa will not turn into suffering, and the old life will not trouble us anymore. We'll do this in a very easy way, so that it's a very simple way, so that it's easy to remember. It's like we have 4 friends. There are 4 people who are our very, very best friends. The first friend is mindfulness. The second friend is intuitive wisdom, panya. The third friend is attentiveness, sampajanya. And the 4th friend is concentration, samadhi. These are our 4 best friends: sati, panya, sampajanya, samadhi, or mindfulness, wisdom, attentiveness, and concentration. Whenever any situation arises, and by this we mean the very moment of contact, it's a very specific moment. At that moment of contact, when it arises, then our friend mindfulness runs and gets our second friend, wisdom. Mindfulness runs and gets wisdom and brings wisdom here. And then once wisdom gets to the contact, wisdom transforms into attentiveness. And attentiveness guards over, watches over, oversees the contact. If attentiveness doesn't have enough strength and power, then the 4th friend, concentration, helps, gives enough power and energy to do the work that needs to be done. So when these 4 best friends of ours, mindfulness, wisdom, attentiveness, and concentration, come together and help us like this, there's no way that patsa can be a problem, because our 4 friends are watching over it and taking care of this situation for us. So we need to have these four friends. Without these four friends, we'll be lost. But with these four friends, phassa will never be a problem for us again. So we have to try our best to have these four friends. We have to put forth great effort to do what it is necessary to obtain these four friends. And then these four friends must train themselves, must be exquisitely trained and in shape in order to deal with, in order to manage phassa, that sense contact, the seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and all the mental things. When these four friends are expert in doing their jobs and performing their functions, then phassa is no problem. As soon as a contact occurs, sati, the first friend, mindfulness, brings wisdom, the second friend. And then wisdom just, the friend that is called wisdom just drives away any value that feeling might have. Once there is sense contact, there must arise feeling. Feeling will automatically arise in response to contact. But the value of that feeling, positive or negative or the uncertain kind, that is just driven away. Our friend wisdom just says, get out of here, leave us alone, don't bother us. And this thing then can't stir up into all the problems of good and evil, or we're not certain whether it's good or evil. This friend we call wisdom, intuitive wisdom, ultimate wisdom, has the mantra, suchness, thusness, voidness, get out of here, leave us alone, and then there's no problem. In this way, phassa is kept from being ignorant, and the feelings don't have this diluted value of positive or negative or undistinguishable. And then that can't get concocted up into all the foolish desires and attachments and suffering. And when it's like this, then those feelings, when the value of those feelings is driven away, then there's just feeling. And the feeling is free. It's independent. And this is the kind of feeling that a human being needs. The feelings that are free. With adequately trained, when these our four friends are expert, then the result will be that feeling is free. It's independent. It's void. In some sects of Mahayana, in some of the Mahayana sects, they have a mantra. They utter the mantra. They utter the word suchness, voidness, or only such, only void. They use this mantra to drive away, to drive off, to chase away the value of the feelings. In this way, the feelings are intelligent, are wise, and when the feelings are intelligent, then the mind is intelligent. When the feelings are ignorant, then the mind is ignorant as well. But when that ignorance is dispelled, is gotten rid of, then the mind is not ignorant. And so, by using this mantra, thusness, suchness, voidness, right at the moment of contact, the feelings are free. They're free of positive, negative, and who knows what, that unable to distinguish one. And then they don't lead into all the problems we've been talking about. So you would all do well to practice, to become very proficient in this mantra, thusness, suchness, voidness, thusness, suchness, voidness. Say it over and over again until you're so skillful and fluent with this mantra that at every contact, this mantra arises automatically and drives away any value that Vedana might have. And then those feelings are wise and intelligent. The mind remains wise and free. This friend of ours, wisdom, comes and says, thusness, voidness, suchness. Every time it comes, it brings these words and keeps Vedana from being ignorant. Whenever there's the experience, then mindfulness brings our friend wisdom, and then wisdom prevents the feelings from being ignorant. Without wisdom, we have the tendency to turn feelings into good and bad and who knows what, positive and negative, likable and dislikable, lovable and hateful and all that. But when there is wisdom there, wisdom just says thusness, suchness, voidness, and doesn't give any opportunity for foolish feeling to occur. And then when the foolish feeling doesn't happen, then there isn't foolish want. This foolish want, when there's no foolish want, then there's no desire. Or in Pali we use the word tanha. Tanha, I prefer the word craving. Craving is always foolish and ignorant. It's blind desire, blind want. And so when there's no foolish desire, there's none of this craving. And then craving doesn't drag the mind along after that desire and get into all kinds of trouble. So when wisdom, our friend Panya, comes in and says suchness, voidness, there's no opportunity for the value of positivism and negativism and uncertainty to arise. And then there's no tanha. Whenever there's foolish feeling, then there arises tanha in some form or another, wanting to get rid of, or running around in circles in confusion. But through wisdom, there's no tanha. Instead, there can be wise feeling and then wise want. There's a very important distinction which many people fail to realize between craving, blind desire, and wise want. When want is wise, it's not selfish, it's just wanting what is we need, wanting to be free of the defilements, wanting to be free of foolish want, wanting to end suffering. This is wise want, and it doesn't cause any problems. But when wanting is foolish, is ignorant, is blind, then we call it craving, and that leads to attachment and drags the mind into all kinds of suffering. So we need to do what is necessary to have wisdom at the moment of experience, of sense contact. But nowadays we don't have any mindfulness, we don't have any wisdom, we don't have any attentiveness, and we don't have any concentration. So contact is foolish, the feelings are stupid, and there's all kind of blind craving and desire. And the result is we suffer. So let's train ourselves, train these four friends, so that there will be wisdom strong enough, quick enough, right there where it's needed to keep everything wise and clean and pure and cool. When we have these four best friends that a human being can have, when we have these four very best friends that are strong enough, quick enough, proficient enough, fast enough, expert enough, then patsa, then we can control, we can regulate, we can manage patsa. And then we can manage the feelings. And then when we can manage the feelings, when we can control the feelings, we can manage everything. Earlier we said that everything has its source, its origin in the feelings. Everything, with no exception. All the things that happen in our lives, these are grounded, are rooted in the feelings. When we can manage, when we can control these feelings, then we can control everything, and nothing will be a problem for us. Excuse us when we speak directly like we've been doing. Please don't take it as an insult or as we're putting you, as if we're putting you down. But when we say that, because we want to tell you that if we can regulate, control the feelings, then we can control God. God is able to make all kinds of things happen that we don't want. But when we can manage the feelings, we can manage everything. And then we can manage God. God won't be able to cause anything that we don't want. This is possible when we can manage the feelings. So please find these four best friends that a human being can have, in order that you can control the feelings and control everything, even God. Please understand these words that we've just said very, very carefully. Don't allow yourself to misunderstand them. Be very careful to understand what we mean when we say that when we can manage the feelings, we can manage everything, even God. When we can control, regulate the feelings, we can regulate everything, including God. When we say this, we mean that we can control the personal God. All of us, the only God we know is this personal, anthropomorphic kind of God that creates things and destroys things. This God that we all have is itself is nothing but the feelings. It's the feelings that creates everything. It's the feelings that destroy everything. This is the meaning that you need to grasp when we say that by controlling the feelings we can control everything. We're not talking about the impersonal God, but we're saying that that impersonal God, which is all that anybody knows, that is nothing but the feelings. So by controlling the feelings, we can control this God. When we talk like this, it may sound as if we're just making fun, or just teasing, or maybe that we're being ignorant. But in reality, this is a very profound fact, and we're doing our best to make it clear to you. By controlling the feelings, we can control even God. We're not speaking in an arrogant way at all. This God that you know is merely the influence of the feelings. The God that everyone is talking about is nothing but the power of the Vedana to make us do this and do that. That's all that people mean when they say God. And so when we say we can control this God, we're just saying we can control the feelings. There's nothing arrogant about this statement at all. It's a fact which you can realize for yourself. Please do what you need to do to realize this important truth. When there's no wisdom at contact, then the feelings are ignorant. And the ignorant feelings stir up ignorant want, desire, craving, blind want. And this is God. God, this ignorant want, leads to all the actions and behavior that we do. It's what ignorant want, craving, forces us to do all these things. And so that desire, that craving, is the meaning of God. God is what makes us, that forces us, makes us to do things. That is God. When we can control feeling, then we can control God, because by keeping the feelings wise, then there is no craving or blind want to force us to do this and that, to chase after things, to run away, and so forth. When we can control the feelings, then there is instead what we can call right aspiration. When the feelings are wise, then they lead to wise or right aspiration. This is completely different than foolish want, blind want, ignorant want, and all that. Right aspiration is to know what needs to be done, and just to do what needs to be done. And there's no foolishness or blindness involved in that. So this is how we can control God, that God of danha, of craving, that makes us do this and that. We can control it by being wise at the feelings, and then there will be only wise aspiration. If we can do this, if we have studied and understood the Vedana, the feelings, sufficiently on this very profound level, then we will be able to practice in this way, and then we will receive the benefits of fruit, the advantage of having only right aspiration and not being under the control of blind craving. We have to be very careful about this word want, because there are two very, very different kinds of want. On one hand, there is the blind, ignorant want that we call craving, tanha, but there can also be wise want that is right aspiration. These two kinds of want are more different than black and white, and so be very careful to notice the difference. When there is ignorant feeling, the mind gets caught up in the values of those ignorant feelings, and there arises blind want, and then that ignorant God goes berserk, trying to make us do all kinds of things which we really don't need to do because they always bring us suffering. But when it's wise feelings, when there's wisdom, when these four very good friends are there to make sure that there's wisdom at the moment of contact, wise feeling is no longer caught up in positive and negative. The mind doesn't get trapped in that. And so we can control the feelings and control that want, that craving. And so instead of blind want, we have wise want, right aspiration. Right aspiration is something that we ought to have. We ought to have it, maintain it, and use it. Because if we have and use right aspiration, then we will do the things that are necessary within our lives, and there won't be any suffering. So we should be very interested in this point, in having right aspiration rather than blind want. Then we will have the correct God, instead of having some insane, ignorant God that causes us problems. With right aspiration, we have a wise and benevolent God, a wise God that does not force us into suffering. So learn the distinction. You ought to be very interested in this distinction between right want and foolish want. Now we'd like to look back over the succession of events that make up the old life. The old life begins with old tattva, or ignorant tattva. When we're ignorant at sense contact, whether it's the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind, then there arises ignorant feeling. And the mind getting caught up in the values of ignorant feelings leads to blind want. Blind want is desiring all kinds of unhealthy, crazy things which will get us into more and more trouble. Once there is danha, craving, blind want, ignorant want, it starts to solidify, or if it hangs around enough, if it coagulates enough, then it becomes what we call upadana, attachment. This is when the feeling of desire turns into the concept I desire, or the desirer, the wanter, the craver. First there's just wanting, desiring, craving. But then this develops into the concept that if there's craving, there must be a craver. If there's want, there must be a wanter, a desirer. And so that ignorant want becomes the ignorant, foolish concept of wanter, desirer, craver. And this then is what we call upadana, or attachment. This may not sound logical to some of you. Some people think that to want, there has to be someone who wants first. Some people's logic says that you have to have the I who craves, the craver, before you can have craving. This is how some people think. But we don't take logic as our standard, we take experience, reality as our standard. And if we examine the truth of the situation, we'll see that in reality, want, ignorant want, craving comes first. Then the concept, the thought that there must be a craver, a wanter. Once there is this craver or wanter, this concept, then this develops further. The mind goes further astray, gets more caught up in this ignorant delusion, and it's the ego, the I, is growing, or the self begins to exist. In Pali we call this bhava, or in the Thai pronunciation, bhava, is this ignorant illusion of self. Now, for many of us, we still believe in this self, but if we have been understanding how the ignorant feelings turn into the ignorant desires, into the ignorant craver, we see that this is all a series of illusions, of mistaken identities. And so when the self begins to exist, this is just a further misconception, a misunderstanding. But it's what's going through the mind, and we take it to be real. because we haven't compared what's in the thought in the mind with the reality of what's taking place. Once the self exists, then that self is ready to enter the playing field, to run out onto the field. And then when it's ready, it's on deck, like a baseball player, and then it's born. It comes up to the bat, it goes out onto the field and gets beat up in some nasty football game and gets caught up in all kinds of suffering. This is what happens. This is how the old life works. This series of events: ignorant contact, ignorant feeling, ignorant desire, attachment, existence, and then the birth of the self. Not the birth of the body, the birth of the ego within the mind. And then it runs out on the playing field. As it is born, it runs out on the playing field and gets caught up in all that chaos and suffering. This is how it works. You can see the progression of events as the mind gets further lost in this illusion. You can see how there's that ignorant craving, that ignorant desire. This is like breeding or mating between two animals. That ignorant desire, that sexual desire. And then this leads to the thought of the craver, the concept of the desirer. This is like conception, when the sperm and the ovum, when the sperm fertilizes the ovum, then you have conception. And then the fertilized egg gestates, and existence, pawa, which comes out of that attachment. Pawa is like gestation. The embryo is growing in the womb. And then as this embryo grows in the womb, it's full-born, it's full-grown, or it's fully developed to be born onto the playing field of life. This is all happening in the mind. It's the self is developing. It's the self that is born. And it all began with ignorant contact leading to ignorant feeling. This is what the old life is like. If we've seen the suffering involved in this old life and we'd like to be free of it, then we have to understand this succession of events that gives rise to the birth of the ego, of the great I am. If we can understand this, then we'll have the knowledge we need to get free of that old life. So when it's the old life, there's ignorant feeling, ignorant want, ignorant attachment. Attachment is always ignorant. And then existence and birth. The ego is born. There's the I, egoism, selfishness is born. And this always leads to suffering, to dukkha. But in the new life, it doesn't happen that way. There's feeling is kept under control. Feeling remains wise. And so feeling only leads to wise aspiration. And wise aspiration doesn't turn into attachment. Wise aspiration, it just stops there. It stops with wise feeling and wise aspiration. That's enough. We don't need any more than that. We don't need the attachment. We don't need that egoism and selfishness and the birth of the ego where it runs out on the playing field to get beat up. We don't need any of that. It just stops there at wise feeling and wise aspiration. This is the new life. When there's sufficient knowledge to control Vedana, to oversee the contact, the sense experience, then the feelings don't get lost in the values of positive, negative, and uncertainty. And then it's free. In the old life, its ignorant feeling is always leading to the birth of the ego, to the birth of the self, to I, to me, to mine, and all of that. And every time that this egoistic birth takes place, there will be suffering. It can happen tens, hundreds, thousands of times in a day. And every time it happens, it's suffering. That's the old life of ego birth, of pain, of sorrow, of suffering. But in the new life, it just stops with wise feeling and wise aspiration, and there's no ego. ego, self, and all that illusion isn't conjured up, isn't stirred up. There's no ego birth, there's no selfishness. There's none of these crazy thoughts about I and me and mine and all the selfishness that comes from that. And so that life is free. It's peaceful. It's wise. There's no problem. The old life is always leading to ego and to suffering. But the new life, because of wisdom, is free. It's calm, it's peaceful, and it's cool. It's free of all that birth. The old life, when there's all that birth, it becomes, when there's birth, there's anything that is born has to get old, it gets sick, and it eventually dies. But in the new life, there's no birth, so there's no getting old, there's no getting sick, and there's no death. The new life is free of birth, aging, illness, and death. The old life is trapped within these worldly conditions, but the new life is free of all that. This is the meaning of Nibbana, the supreme thing, the highest goal in Buddhism. In the new life, we can realize Nibbana. There is total freedom from birth, aging, illness, and death. I hope that you are interested in this new life that is not trapped under birth, aging, illness, and death, and all the suffering that they bring. Physical birth, the birth of these bodies out of the wombs of our mothers, is no big deal. It happens once in a lifetime, and so it in itself is no problem. Being born physically is no problem. It's just an event that happens to all of us. But there's another kind of birth, which is the birth we've been talking about. This is spiritual birth. When we talk about spiritual birth, we mean the birth of the ego, the self, of the concepts, the thoughts of I am, of egoism, self-centeredness, of selfishness. This birth of the I, the ego, the self, the soul, within the mind, is what we mean by spiritual birth. It has nothing to do with the body. It's a birth in the mind. It happens over and over again throughout our lives, many, many times, hundreds, thousands of times each day. This is the spiritual birth that is stirred up by the ignorant feelings and ignorant desire and attachment. This is the spiritual birth that always leads to dukkha, to suffering. Whenever there's some ignorant wants in this direction or that, wanting for this and that, then it leads to being born in some form or another, born in some condition or state or another, being born as this, as that, as him, as her, being born in all kinds of different ways. And whatever the kind of birth, whether it's animal or human or celestial, whatever the kind of birth, and you're going through many of them in each day as the mind keeps changing and under the influence of the feelings, whatever the birth, it will always bring suffering. It will always bring pain, conflict, unsatisfaction, discontent, friction in one form or another. That's the old life that is trapped within that spiritual birth. But in the new life, there is none of this birth. There is no I and mine and ego and self and soul taking place in the mind, and so the mind is free. This is the mind that realizes Nibbana. Nibbana, the utmost voidness. Nibbana, coolness, perfect freedom. This is something that we won't have time to go into today. We'll save it for a later lecture. We'll save the discussion of Nibbana because it's for another time, since it's such a very important issue or thing to talk about. But the point to know now is that by studying and controlling the Vedana, spiritual birth won't take place, and then there won't be any suffering. And then we have this thing we call the new life that is free of birth, aging, illness, and death. Birth, aging, illness, and death as physical processes are not important. They're just natural things. But birth, aging, illness, and death in the mind, the deluded mind that is attaching to these things as I and mine, that brings great suffering. Physical death is no problem, but the attaching to death as I and mine brings great suffering. So we have to get to know all these things. And so in order to control the Vedana, we must know ourselves. We have to study ourselves. It's kind of funny. You need to study yourself, but there's no self. You'll have to figure this one out too. You yourself must study and practice the Dhamma. But that self that has to study and practice is not a self. Can you understand the meaning of this? The self that is not a self must study and practice the Dhamma. You have to know what our life is, where it comes from, where it's going, what this process of life is, what makes it up. We've been talking about these things in order to help you to know yourself, to understand yourself, in order to have sufficient wisdom to keep the feelings under control, to prevent attachment and spiritual birth and all that suffering. This self-knowledge, this self-understanding, is not something that you can get from books. And listening to a lecture like this will not do it either. Just reading and listening, or even just thinking logically, will not bring you the knowledge of yourself that you need. This self-knowledge must be found by studying our own lives, by being very aware and mindful of the process and events of our own life. And only in this way, not by listening, not by reading, but only by studying our own lives, the reality of them, can we have the true self-knowledge that is genuine wisdom, which can keep the feelings under control so they don't get caught within the power of the positivism, negativism, so we can see it all as just thus, as voidness. And then the mind is free and realizes Nibbana, the highest fruit, the highest benefit that life can bring. The only thing that is really worth having, the only thing that's really worth aspiring toward is this Nibbana. So we've done our best to explain this, and now we've been talking for over 2 hours, over 2.5 hours. So we request that you allow us to end the lecture at this point, and we'll save the discussion of Nibbana for another time. Today, we intend to speak to you about the thing called Nibbana, or Nibbana. Many of you have probably heard of the word nirvana or nirvana, which is a Sanskrit word. In Buddhism here, we don't use Sanskrit very much. Instead, we use Pali. The word Nibbana means the same thing as the Sanskrit word nirvana. However, this word nirvana is a bit chancy or dangerous because it's very close to the word nivarana, which means the hindrances, which are things that disturb the mind. And so the word nibbana is safer. It's less often misunderstood. But whether we call it nibbana or nirvana, we're speaking of essentially the same thing. We've all heard some things about this thing we call nibbana and have some understanding and interest about it. However, there remain things which you do not understand completely, and so we will be discussing some further things which you ought to be greatly interested in. Nibbana is the highest thing in Buddhism. It's the supreme thing in Buddhism. However, almost all the different sects, creeds, and doctrines that have occurred in India have had some aspect or something they called Nibbana or Nirvana. They've all had some kind of Nirvana. However, the meaning in each creed or doctrine or school can differ, and is often quite different than the meaning we'll be discussing here. Today, we'll be talking especially about nibbana in Buddhism. Somebody described nibbana in a way that is both easy to understand and also correct. They said that nibbana is the summum bonum, the utmost goodness of Buddhism. All genuine religions, all the different sects and creeds and denominations in India and elsewhere have something that is its summum bonum. For example, in Christianity, the summum bonum is to be with God in the kingdom of God. And so Buddhism also has its summum bonum, which is nibbana. Without nibbana, Buddhism would not be Buddhism. Or we could say that without nibbana, Buddhism would have no meaning or value. And this is why we study the thing called nibbana as the essence, or the heart, or the goal of Buddhism. Without this, Buddhism would be meaningless. There's a very important matter which is commonly misunderstood. Many people think that nibbana means death, that nibbana is the same thing as death, or that it occurs after death. This is a very grave and serious misunderstanding. If something is truly to be the summum bonum, it must be something that we can get in this very life, right here and now, in this present life. If we must wait for some other life, then it can't be the summum bonum. So the summum bonum of Buddhism, nibbana, has nothing to do with death. But this is a common problem. It occurs even in Christianity. The true kingdom of God is something that we can find in our own hearts here in this life. But there are many people who think that it must come after death. And so they have the same problem as those who believe that nibbana means death or happens after death. And so there are some who must wait for the kingdom of God or nibbana until after they die. This understanding is not correct. It's not proper, and it has no benefit for human beings. So whether we call it the kingdom of God or the summum bonum or nibbana, please understand that it has nothing to do with death. The same problem exists in both religions. There are some Christians that insist that the kingdom of God can only be entered in the afterlife, or whatever they want to call it. They won't accept that we can enter the kingdom of God within our own hearts right here in this life. And the same thing happens in Buddhism. Those who insist that nibbana comes after death. Let's be very careful on this matter and understand correctly that both nibbana and the kingdom of God, if they are to have meaning and benefit for human beings, that they must be something that we can have, get, receive, obtain, experience, whatever, right here in this life, this present life, before death. Allow us to tell you in advance a little bit ahead of time, so it'll be easier for you to understand later, that when one enters or penetrates or realizes nibbana, then one at the same time enters the kingdom of God or is at one with God. When the mind is at one with God or enters the kingdom of God, then it realizes nibbana. Please understand this now. It will help you as this talk continues. So many Buddhists think that Nibbana occurs after death, that Nibbana is some city or state or place, some wonderful city where we go after death. This understanding is both amusing and laughable, and at the same time very, very sad and pitiful. The same thing happens in Christianity, of course. Those who think that the kingdom of God is some physical city or place or kingdom. When this understanding interferes, then people aren't able to realize that Nibbana and the kingdom of God are to be experienced within each individual's own heart or mind when that individual has correctly practiced Dhamma. This is a point we should all understand. All the various sects and schools that occurred in India in the Buddha's time taught that Nibbana was something experienced within this very life, within the heart and mind in this life. The exact meaning of it may have differed. Some said that the experience of the first level of absorption or deep concentration was Nibbana. Some said the second level of absorption, others the third or the fourth, or the so-called immaterial absorption, such as consciousness is infinite or nothingness or is limitless. And various deep levels of concentration were taken to be nirvana or nibbana, but in all of these cases it was understood that nibbana occurred within this life. The misunderstanding that nibbana was some city or place we went to after death arose later. Another misunderstanding, which is equally pitiful, is one that is very common nowadays. There are many that believe that nibbana is something that is out of date or old-fashioned or something just for old people. Some even say that it's foolish or impossible nowadays. So there are many who have no interest in nibbana because they feel it's old-fashioned or beyond what modern, or something that modern man should not be interested in. This understanding is very dangerous. It seems that the same thing happens in Christianity, where there are many people who think that the kingdom of God is old-fashioned, out of date, foolish, even stupid. These misunderstandings ought to be eliminated and gotten rid of so that we can be interested in the true Nibbana. And so we're going to pull these back into the present, into our own hearts. We're going to pull Nibbana and pull the kingdom of God into our hearts right now in the present in order to understand, realize, and have these highest things, Nibbana and the kingdom of God. There are many directions from which we can approach this thing, Nibbana. First, we'll look at the word in its literal sense. We'll look at the letter of Nibbana. When we take Nibbana literally, it has the meaning, the quenching of fires, or the quenching of hot things. Anytime something hot is quenched, is cooled, that is the meaning of Nibbana. So in the physical way, if a physical fire is quenched, is cooled, we call that Nibbana. Or if the mental fires, the defilements of greed, anger, and delusion are cooled, are quenched, we call that Nibbana. But in both sense, whether it's physical or mental, we can use the same word. We prefer this word quench. And so please listen to it carefully. The quenching of heat, of fire, is the meaning, the literal meaning of the word Nibbana. It might surprise you to know that this, in the Pali language, is a very common, ordinary word. It has it was originally just a word that children and adults and everyone would use. Anytime something hot cooled off or was quenched, that was the word nibbana could be used, whether it was a physical thing or a mental thing. This is the literal sense of nibbana. So a child might yell out from the kitchen that the fire nibbanad, I mean the fire cooled down or went out. Or the child might call out that the soup has nibbanad, meaning the soup has cooled down enough that we can eat it. The meaning of the word nibbana has these very common, ordinary, everyday meanings that even a child would know and use. And so we can use it even for material, physical things. So to understand it, we should understand it in this material aspect as well. Or a goldsmith working with gold in his furnace, then when he took the molten gold and poured it out and then cooled it with air or with water, that gold, that hot molten gold, would also nibbana. It would cool down. So we can use the word in this sense as well. Or wild animals that have been recently captured from the forest, animals that still are quite fierce and dangerous. When these animals are tamed or are trained until they become tamed, when all that fierceness and danger has been cooled down, then we can say that these animals have been made nibbana. When the fire of wildness and danger has been nibbana, we can use the word in this sense also. So, in the literal sense, these various meanings we've discussed so far all come down to a cooling down, a quenching of fire or of heat. And we've used it so far in a physical, material sense. The meaning, the sense, the deeper sense of the word nibbana, we can use it about the mind and about life. And so when one's life is cool, when one's family situation is cool, we can also use this word nibbana. When our life is free of problems and hassles and disturbances and annoyances, then we can say that life is nibbana. And so in this deeper sense, the meaning of nibbana is cool or coolness. When someone's life, when the mind is cool, as we have just described, this is called nibbutta, one who is cool, or the cool one. Let us tell you ahead of time also that whenever the mind is free of any conception or emotion of I and mine, of self and of selfishness, then that mind is cool. But whenever there arises in the mind a thought or an emotion or idea or sense of I, of mine, of self, of selfishness, then that mind becomes hot. So when the mind is free of this heat, it is cool. It is nibbana. Now once again, the limitations of language make difficulties for us. So when we say cool, many people think that this is the opposite of hot. Real nibbana that we're speaking of is not the opposite, is not the partner or the mate of hotness or heat. The cool of nibbana that we're talking about has nothing to do with temperature. It isn't the opposite or the complement, the correlate of hotness or heat. And cool also, in this meaning, doesn't have anything to do with cold. If you were cold, really cold, well then you'd catch pneumonia and die. And that's not what we're talking about. The coolness of Nibbana is not the opposite. It's not caught up in any of the meanings of hot and cold and temperature. It's a different kind of cool. A coolness when the mind is void of I and mine and selfishness. So then we come back to the word void. Void that is void of positive and negative, of hot and cold, of all dualisms. Void that is above all of that duality. This is the real meaning of coolness. The real coolness is void. It has nothing to do with hot and cold or with positive and negative. In the Pali text, it's recorded very clearly that the quenching of the fire of raga, lust, the quenching of the fire of tosa, anger, and the quenching of the fire of moha, delusion, this is Nibbana. So understand coolness in terms of the quenching of those fires of lust, anger, and delusion. Now, let's start over and take a good look at the importance of this thing we're calling coolness or quenching. If we look at our own lives, we'll see that without the quenching and cooling of thirst, of craving, then we would either go crazy or we would die. All the desires and craving and thirst and hunger and fears and worries, all these fires that are coming up all the time each day. If there wasn't any quenching and cooling of these fires, if all these fires were burning in the mind constantly, non-stop, then the mind couldn't take it and we would go crazy, or if we didn't go crazy, we would just plain die. This is pointing to the very basic necessity of Nibbana, of quenching in this meaning, that the calming of all that desire and craving and thirst, that cooling, that quenching, is necessary if we're going to avoid going insane, if we're going to avoid committing suicide. So in just this very fundamental way, can you see the importance right here, today, right now, in your own lives of Nibbana? So even if this quenching is just a little bit here and a little bit there, only very temporary, or little Nibbanas, little temporary quenchings, even so it is still absolutely necessary for the survival of life. So if you can reflect in this way, you'll see that for all of us, the quenching of these fires is absolutely necessary. If, for example, if hunger went on endlessly, continuously, without letting up, without ever stopping, then we would die. If anger was a constant phenomena, continuous in our life, then we would die. Or even if love for our lover, if this love just went on and on and on without ever being quenched, then we would die. For all of us, the continuation, the survival of our life depends on quenching, on Nibbana. If all these fires went on and on and on, we couldn't take it. So it's Nibbana that sustains life. This quenching, this cooling, nourishes, sustains life. Without it, life could not continue. If you can see this, you will see how important Nibbana is, even to those who have no interest in spiritual things. They still need it in order to survive. There are two types of quenching. The first is the quenching that happens by itself, and the second is the quenching that we have arranged, that has occurred through our practice of Dhamma. All the things that happen within our lives will quench eventually by themselves. All the harmful or evil or hot things that occur in the mind, these will naturally quench by themselves. Nothing is permanent. So all these things will eventually come to a quenching or cooling of their own. But sometimes if that doesn't happen soon enough, or if we have enough wisdom, we can be aware of the possibility to quench these things through our practice of Dhamma. Please note the difference between the two kinds of quenching. We can study the meaning of Nibbana right here, now, today, in our own lives. We can just take the ordinary experiences of our lives and use these as a way to explore what Nibbana is. For example, when a fire goes out, just a very simple experience of seeing a fire, a candle, a match go out. In that we can see the meaning of Nibbana in a very simple way. Or when we take a bath. When we take a bath, the water cools down the heat of the body. And this is an experience of quenching. Or when we sweat, when we perspire, the sweat coming out of our pores cools the body, cools that heat down. This is an experience of Nibbana. We can use these very basic human experiences to learn, to get to know the meaning of Nibbana. We can directly experience it in this way for ourselves. There are all kinds of these examples. When it rains, we can experience the cooling that occurs all over from the rain. Or when there is an illness, a pain or fever or something, when this goes away, we can experience that quenching. All kinds of different experiences that will occur in our daily life can help us to discover the meaning of quenching, of Nibbana. But nobody takes the time to look. Nobody is interested in this thing called Nibbana. And so they don't even look for it and are completely unaware of it, although it's happening constantly in our own lives. So take the time to pay attention to these very simple experiences of Nibbana that are occurring in all the things around us and in everything that arises within our minds. We can use all of these in order to discover the meaning of quenching. In brief, we can see Nibbana or quenching in everything. All things that arise, all things that are caused, that occur, all things that are born will eventually quench, will eventually Nibbana. For this reason, we can study this quenching in everything. All the various things that arise eventually will quench. In Pali, the words are Yankinchi,
Samutaya Dhammang,
Samutaya Dhammang,
Sappantang,
Sappantang,
Nirotha Dhammang,
Nirotha Dhammang, which means all the things that arise through causes will quench. And to see this is to see Dhamma. When we start to see this quenching, the cooling of all conditioned things like this and all the things that happen within our lives, when we see this quenching that occurs within all these things, then we begin to see Dhamma. The eye of Dhamma, the spiritual eye, begins to open as we see all this quenching happening everywhere. And when the eye of Dhamma, the spiritual eye, begins to open, then we begin to understand the Dhamma. And so in everything that you could possibly see or know or experience is an opportunity to begin to see this truth of quenching, to see this fact of Nibbana. And if we begin to see this, then the spiritual eye begins to open. And as that understanding of Dhamma grows, it is through this that the spiritual path develops and reaches fruition. Whenever you see the quenching of something, then you ought to see nibbana in that thing. Whenever you see something quenched, you ought to see nibbana. Whatever it is, no matter where, in anything where you see quenching, you should see nibbana. If we can study nibbana in all the things that are happening everywhere, anywhere, all the time, then we will start to understand the true meaning of nibbana. We can begin with the little things, the little quenchings that really don't have that much meaning or significance. But then we can explore more and more deeply so that the understanding of nibbana becomes more and more deep, more profound, and gets closer and closer to the true nibbana that is the most significant thing in human life. So using all the different possibilities, all the different occurrences of quenching within our lives, we can study the meaning, the significance of nibbana. So take the opportunity of all these little nibbanas that occur every day. Study them more and more until the understanding and experience deepens, until the point where we have a sincere desire and need for the highest, the most complete, the perfect nibbana. Please don't be careless about these little quenchings that occur each and every day. Just because they're small doesn't mean they should be overlooked. These are the starting point of our understanding. So we should be very careful to observe these little nibbanas, the momentary quenchings that are occurring all the time. And then to study these so that our understanding grows and becomes more correct, more profound, until we develop a very earnest and sincere desire for perfect nibbana. So use these small opportunities that nature is giving you now in order to develop towards the more perfect nibbana. So if we observe in the way we have been describing and come to see that it's these little nibbanas, these little quenchings that sustain life, that nourish life, that cool life, that allow us to continue in life. If we start to see this, then we will genuinely appreciate nibbana, and we will start to actually love nibbana, this thing that allows us to live. And then our desire, our need, our want for nibbana will grow and grow until it becomes very sincere and earnest. So use these little opportunities to allow our love and need for nibbana to grow, and so that we will then apply ourselves fully to the higher methods which will allow the realization of perfect nibbana. So now we have studied the little nibbanas sufficiently, understood this basic level of nibbana well enough that we can begin to develop this understanding, to expand it, to broaden it, in order to come to a realization of the nibbana which is complete, which is full, which is perfect. So please take this beginning level of study now and expand it towards a deeper realization. Please study this matter very, very carefully. The first thing we need to understand is what we call dukkha or tukka, suffering, mental suffering. If we don't understand this thing called tukka, then it's hopeless. It's impossible that we would ever understand nibbana. So let's begin by understanding what is meant by tukka, suffering, so that we can also understand nibbana. As we said earlier, nibbana is the quenching of dukkha. But if we don't know dukkha, then how are we going to know that quenching? Or if we don't know what dukkha is, well then there's no meaning. There isn't any real quenching for us if we don't understand what dukkha is. So then, let's look into the matter of dukkha. Let's explore, examine the dukkha that is occurring, the suffering that's happening in our own lives today and every day, in our normal daily lives, in order to understand dukkha sufficiently that we can also understand the quenching, the nibbana of that dukkha. So we can, in every day, there are all kinds of little dukkhas, little experiences of dukkha happening over and over and over again, all the time. These little experiences of dukkha are happening over and over again. And so there are a lot of these little things that are dukkha, that are suffering. And so we can get to know these. In Pali we call these, in Thai, the niwan, in Pali the nivarana, which is that word that tends to get confused with nirvana. Nirvana and nivarana are quite different. The niwan we often translate as the hindrances. You'll start to understand what we mean as we describe them. They're these little things which disturb and annoy the mind, which pester the mind throughout the day. The first of these is the feeling that kind of flows in a sexual way. It's a sexual feelings or feelings of sexuality. And these are, if you pay attention to these, you'll see how they excite and disturb and annoy the mind all the time. And when the mind is being pestered by these sexual feelings, how cool is the mind? Can the mind be cool at all? For the mind to be cool, these sexual feelings have to be quenched. And so this is the first example, the first of the nivarana. The second one is dislike, aversion, ill will. It's when we don't like anything. We don't like this, we don't like that, we don't like this person, we don't like that person. This feeling becomes so stupid that we don't like anything. We don't really know what it is we don't like. There's just this feeling of dislike, of aversion. When the mind is being pestered like this, annoyed by this feeling, it's not at all comfortable or peaceful. But when this feeling of dislike is quenched, then the mind is very much at ease. It's cool. This is the second of the nivarana, the feeling of dislike, of aversion. The third of these is when the mind is weak, dull, when the energy level of the mind has dropped, when the mind is very low in energy. It's not very bright, it's kind of dull, dim, weak. When the mind is lacking in energy like this, then it really isn't able to do any work. It's lacking the freshness, the brightness that we need to do anything. And so the mind like this is very lazy, very, very dull. It's very dim. This includes also when the mind is drowsy and sleepy. All these feelings in the mind which are tied in with a weak level of energy. When the mind is lacking in the strength, the brightness, the freshness, the sharpness that it needs to function properly, to do the various duties of life. This all makes up this third nivarana, when the mind is dull, weak, dim, drowsy, and so forth. You need to get to know this thing as it really exists. It's not good enough just to write it down in your notebook or to think about it, but to examine this as it arises in your own mind all the time, even maybe right now. Get to know it as it really exists, and then you will be able to start to see how it quenches as well. The fourth one is the opposite of the third. It's when the energy in the mind is causing the mind to scatter, to disperse, to reek out. It's a bubbling, bouncy, scattered, distracted mind that's bouncing all over the place, running all over the place. When the mind is dispersed and distracted like this, it's unable to think, it's unable to work. It can't do anything properly because its energy is going off in all directions. This is something that, of course, is occurring to all of you constantly. And so it's time you got to know it and really studied what it is like. So the fourth of these is this dispersion, this distracting, this scattering of the mind and its energy. The fifth nivarana, or hindrance, is uncertainty. Uncertainty, or doubt, or suspicion. It's when we're uncertain about what is happening or what is right, when we're uncertain about whether what we're doing is correct, where we sit there and think, is this right? Am I doing the right thing? Or is my life correct? We have all kinds of doubts like this. Is what I'm doing right? And when we are thinking like this, then we are never contented. There is no contentment. And these doubts and suspicions and uncertainty arises about our life. Is our way of life, is our life really safe? Is it really healthy? Is it really correct? We're being disturbed by these doubts and uncertainties all the time. And so our life is never really at peace. It's happening in your own minds, whether you've taken the time to look or not. It's happening. And so it's much better to observe it in the reality of the thing and not just the sound or the letters of the word.